I toast to the most generous people I know, my incredible in-laws.
Here, here.
They've welcomed me with open arms.
Not everyone.
You have to read this. He doesn't know. What is this? Please.
He's looking.
Okay, I've got it. Don't worry. No, it can't be true. Warning, don't sign anything. Your son wants your house.
I saw you.
Nothing.
I'm fine.
Christmas dinner was almost over when my son stood and raised his glass. To Robert and Susan, Michael said, smiling at his in-laws, "Everything Emily and I have built we couldn't have done without you." Everyone applauded. I didn't. I sat there remembering the $45,000 I'd given him for his first house, the mortgage payments I'd covered, and every check I'd quietly written when he was struggling. Then my 15-year-old grandson Noah slipped something into my hand beneath the table. In the bathroom, I unfolded the note. "Grandma, don't sign anything Dad gives you. He wants your house." My hands went cold. Then Michael knocked on the door. "Mom, everything okay?" I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. "Yes," I said. But nothing was okay anymore. "Before I tell you what happened next, tell me honestly, what would you have done in my place? If this story already has you wondering who you can trust when money and family collide, give it a like and subscribe. And leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love knowing where these stories find you." Everything I never asked credit for. I learned a long time ago that there are two kinds of giving. There is the kind people announce, photograph, and remind you about every Thanksgiving. And then there is the kind mothers do, quietly. For most of my life, I belonged to the second kind. My husband David and I were never wealthy. We were comfortable, but every bit of that comfort had been earned slowly. David worked for the city's public works department, and I spent more than 30 years as a payroll administrator at a hospital in Richmond. I knew what money looked like before it became money. It looked like overtime. It looked like packing lunch instead of buying it. It looked like driving the same car for 12 years because it still started every morning. David and I bought our house when Michael was still young. It wasn't impressive then. 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, hardwood floors that squeaked in winter, and a backyard David insisted was big enough for tomatoes. Over the years, we made it ours. David built shelves in the garage. I planted hydrangeas along the porch. Michael scratched his initials into the doorframe when he was 9, thinking we wouldn't notice. We noticed. We never painted over them. By the time David died, we had nearly paid off the mortgage. Losing him changed the shape of my entire life. For 37 years, I had fallen asleep beside the same man. Then suddenly, there was an empty side of the bed, an unused coffee mug in the cabinet, and a silence in the house that seemed to have weight. Michael worried about me. Back then, he called almost every evening. "You eating, Mom?" "Yes." "Real food?" I would laugh. "I raised you. I think I can feed myself." He would bring Emily and the children over on Sundays. Noah was little then, and Lily was still a baby. Their noise filled the rooms David's absence had emptied. Maybe that was why helping Michael never felt like sacrifice. It felt like keeping my family moving forward. Several years after David died, Michael and Emily decided to buy their first real family home. They had found a place in a good school district with enough bedrooms for the children and a backyard where Noah could play. They were thrilled. Then Michael called me. They were short on the down payment. He never directly asked for money. He didn't have to. I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "How much?" I asked. "Mom, no." "How much, Michael?" There was a long pause. Eventually he told me. A week later, I transferred $45,000. I still remember Michael standing in my kitchen after the transfer cleared. His eyes were wet. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm going to pay you back." "No, you're not." "Mom, I mean it. Build a good life. Raise those children. That's enough." He promised he would never forget what I had done. At the time, I believed him. And to be fair, for years, I think he meant it. Then came another difficult period. Michael lost his job during a company restructuring. He had 2 children, a mortgage, car payments, and a confidence that disappeared faster than his paycheck. He didn't tell me how bad things were until I noticed him avoiding Sunday dinner. When I finally got the truth out of him, they were behind on bills. I covered 3 months of their mortgage. again quietly. Emily knew they had gotten help, but Michael handled most of the conversations with me. I never knew exactly how much he told her. I didn't ask. That became a pattern. When Noah and Lily were born, David and I had talked about helping with their education someday. After David died, I kept that promise by opening education accounts for both children. Every month a little money went in. Not enough to make anyone rich, enough to give my grandchildren choices. There were other things too. A dental emergency, a broken furnace, a summer when Michael's commission checks were smaller than expected. None of those moments seemed important enough to keep score. I never kept a list titled Things My Son Owes Me. Michael was my child even when he was 40 years old. But something changed as his career improved. He started earning more. Emily's interior design business began attracting wealthier clients. They joined a country club. Their vacations became more elaborate. And Robert and Susan Bennett became a much larger presence in their social life. Robert had owned a successful regional business before retiring. Susan knew everyone worth knowing at every charity event she attended. They were generous people in their own way. That mattered. I never hated them. But Michael admired their world. I could see it. He started mentioning Robert's business advice constantly. Robert says I should negotiate harder. Robert thinks we should refinance. Robert introduced me to someone. At first I was pleased. A man can benefit from having people around him who know things his mother doesn't. But slowly, something else happened. Michael began editing his past. At dinners, he would tell stories about struggling when he was younger, but somehow the help I had given him disappeared from the story. The house became something he and Emily had worked their way into. The months after his job loss became a time when they had tightened their belts and figured it out. I would sit there knowing what had actually happened, and I said nothing. Once at a family barbecue, Susan complimented Michael on how responsibly he had handled those difficult early years. Michael glanced at me. For 1 second our eyes met. He knew that I knew. I smiled and passed the potato salad. That was all. Maybe that was my mistake. I thought dignity meant never demanding recognition. I thought love meant allowing the people you helped to stand tall, without reminding them whose hand had steadied them. But there is a difference between refusing to embarrass someone and allowing them to erase you. I didn't understand that yet. By the time Noah became a teenager, Michael called less often. He was always busy. There were meetings, dinners, weekend trips, networking events. When he did call, our conversations sometimes drifted toward my finances. Had I finished paying off the house? Was the property insurance expensive? Had I thought about downsizing? Property values in my neighborhood had gone up, he mentioned once. I thought those were ordinary questions from a son worried about his aging mother. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention. Then came that Christmas dinner. Michael stood beneath a chandelier I remembered helping him afford and raised a glass to Robert and Susan. Everything Emily and I have built, we couldn't have done without you. Everyone applauded. I watched my son smile. And for the first time, his silence about me didn't feel like forgetfulness. It felt deliberate. I had spent years telling myself I didn't need credit. But sitting at that table with Noah's warning hidden in my pocket, I finally understood something that frightened me far more than Michael's toast. Maybe my silence hadn't simply allowed my son to forget the truth. Maybe it had given him enough room to replace it with a version that served him better. And if Michael was willing to rewrite the past, I suddenly needed to know what he was planning to do with my future. What Noah heard, I kept Noah's note in my pocket for the rest of Christmas dinner. Every few minutes, my fingers touched the folded paper through the fabric as if I needed proof that I hadn't imagined those words. Grandma, don't sign anything Dad gives you. He wants your house. When I came out of the bathroom, Michael was waiting in the hallway. He studied my face. You sure you're okay? Too much dinner, I said. Your wife feeds people like she's expecting a snowstorm. He laughed. For a moment, he looked like my son again. That was the hardest part. When someone you love frightens you, your mind desperately searches for the version of them that never would. Michael touched my shoulder. Come on, the kids are opening the rest of their presents. I followed him back into the living room. Noah looked at me immediately. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. His shoulders relaxed. I didn't confront Michael. Not that night. I had spent 30 years processing hospital payroll. I had learned something useful during those years. When numbers didn't make sense, you didn't accuse someone before you had the records. You gathered facts. So I smiled when Lily showed me the sweater Susan had bought her. I thanked Emily for dinner. I hugged Robert and Susan goodbye, and I waited. About 20 minutes later, Noah carried 2 bags of wrapping paper toward the garage. "I'll help you," I said. Michael barely looked up. "Don't let Grandma do the work, buddy." The irony nearly made me laugh. I followed Noah through the kitchen. The moment the garage door closed behind us, he turned around. "I'm sorry, Grandma." "For what?" The note. His face was pale. I was 15, tall enough now that I had to look slightly upward at him, but in that moment I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "You have nothing to apologize for. I didn't know how to tell you." "Tell me what?" He looked toward the door. "Dad can't know I told you." My stomach tightened. "I won't put you in the middle of this, but if there's something I need to know, tell me once. Then you let me handle the adults." He nodded. "A few nights ago I came downstairs because I wanted my headphones. I left them in Dad's office. I waited. Mom and Dad were arguing. About me, I think so." He lowered his voice. "I heard Dad say, 'Once Mom signs the transfer, we can finally fix this.'" The word transfer landed heavily. "What did your mother say?" She said, "What if she doesn't agree?" "And your father?" Noah swallowed. He said, "She'll agree if she thinks it's about protecting the house." For several seconds I said nothing. The garage suddenly seemed colder. "Are you sure those were his words?" His words, yes. I hated myself for asking him to repeat them, but I needed certainty. "What else did you hear?" "Not everything." They were talking quietly. "Anything you remember," he thought. Dad said something about equity. That word I understood. And collateral. I don't really know what that means. I did. Collateral was something valuable you promised against a debt. My heart began beating harder. "What else?" "He said it had to happen after Christmas. Or maybe right after Christmas. Did you hear the name of a bank number, a company?" He shook his head. "A lawyer number. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing." His eyes dropped. "I wasn't trying to spy. I know. I just wanted my headphones." I reached for his hand. "Noah, listen to me. You did the right thing telling me because you thought I might be in danger of making a decision without knowing the truth. But from now on, I don't want you listening at doors. I don't want you searching your father's office. I don't want you looking through papers. But what if no?" I squeezed his hand. "This is not your responsibility." He looked frightened. That hurt me more than anything Michael had done so far. A 15-year-old boy should have been thinking about school friends' basketball Christmas vacation, not whether his father was planning something against his grandmother. "Grandma, yes. Can Dad take your house?" "No." The answer came quickly, though I wasn't as certain as I sounded. "My name is on my house. I haven't signed anything giving it to anybody. But he said you were going to sign. He hasn't asked me." Noah frowned. "Then why did he talk like it was already decided?" That was the question I couldn't answer. A sound came from inside the house. We both turned. Emily opened the door. "There you two are." She smiled. Michael was wondering where his cleanup crew disappeared to. "We were talking about school," I said. Noah looked at me. Emily didn't seem suspicious. "Well, come inside before you freeze." I followed Noah back into the kitchen. Michael was standing near the dining table stacking plates. For the first time that evening, I watched him, not as my son, but as a man whose intentions I did not understand. He looked ordinary. That disturbed me. I had expected guilt to look different. Michael glanced up. "You heading home soon, Mom?" "In a few minutes. You want me to drive you? I've been driving longer than you've been alive." He smiled. "There she is." I smiled back. But inside, something had shifted. On the drive home, Richmond was quiet. Christmas lights glowed from porches. Plastic reindeer stood in yards. Wreaths hung from doors. Usually I loved driving through the neighborhood on Christmas night. David and I used to make a game of choosing which house had gone too far with decorations. That night I barely saw them. Equity. Collateral. transfer, protecting the house. The words repeated in my head. When I reached home, I sat in my car for nearly a minute before getting out. My house looked exactly as it always had. The porch light was on. The hydrangeas David and I had planted were bare for winter. The brass numbers beside the door needed polishing. Nothing had changed. Yet Noah's note had changed how I saw everything. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of pine from my Christmas tree greeted me. On the wall near the kitchen was a photograph of David holding Michael when he was 6 years old. I stopped in front of it. Michael was laughing. David had one arm around him. For one foolish moment, I wanted my husband to walk into the room and explain everything. "Did we do something wrong?" I whispered. The house gave me no answer. I took Noah's note from my pocket and unfolded it again. "He wants your house." I sat at the kitchen table. Maybe Michael had a reasonable explanation. Maybe he was planning some estate arrangement and had explained it badly to Emily. Maybe Noah had misunderstood adult financial language. I wanted every one of those possibilities to be true. But one sentence would not leave me alone. "She'll agree if she thinks it's about protecting the house." That wasn't how you spoke when you intended to tell someone the truth. That was how you spoke when you intended to make someone believe something. I thought back over the previous year. Michael asking whether my mortgage was completely paid. Michael mentioning how much homes in my neighborhood had appreciated. Michael casually suggesting I should get everything organized while I was healthy. At the time, I had heard concern. Now I heard questions. Questions about value. Questions about ownership. Questions about access. I walked through my house slowly. The kitchen where David and I had danced on our 25th anniversary. The hallway where Michael's childhood height marks were still penciled inside a closet frame. The living room where Noah had taken his first steps. This wasn't simply property, it was 40 years of my life, and somewhere along the way, my son had apparently started looking at it differently. I folded Noah's note and placed it in the drawer beside my checkbook. Then I locked the drawer. That small action felt strange. I had never hidden anything from Michael before. Before going upstairs, I stood in the darkened living room and looked around. I still didn't know what Michael wanted. I didn't know what debt deal or desperation had made my house important enough to discuss behind my back. But I knew one thing. If my son wanted my signature, he was going to have to look me in the eyes and tell me why. And this time, I wasn't going to make it easy for him by staying silent. Before I could ask another question, Michael said he would be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 18. I watched through this front window as his SUV pulled into my driveway. Michael climbed out carrying a bright red folder. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I reminded myself that he didn't know what Noah had told me. That was the only advantage I had. I opened the door before he knocked. "Merry Christmas again," he said. "You already used that one." He smiled and kissed my cheek. Everything about him looked ordinary. I wore jeans, a navy sweater, and the watch Emily had given him for his birthday. The red folder was tucked beneath his arm. I stepped aside. "Coffee." "Sure." He followed me into the kitchen and sat in the chair where David used to read the Sunday newspaper. I hated noticing that. I hated noticing everything. I poured Michael coffee. He set the folder on the table. For several minutes he talked about Christmas. Lily loved her gifts. Robert had eaten too much pie. Emily was exhausted from hosting. He even joked about Noah disappearing into the garage with me. I kept my face neutral. Then Michael placed one hand on the red folder. "So, there it was. I've been meaning to talk to you about getting some things organized." "What things?" "Financial stuff. The house. Emergency planning." I took a sip of coffee. "My finances are organized." "I know. I'm not saying they aren't." He smiled patiently. "But you're 68 now, Mom." I set my mug down. "And a nothing. You're healthy. You're independent. That's exactly why this is the best time to simplify things." Simplify. That word would appear several times that morning. Michael opened the folder. Inside were documents separated by colored tabs. Some had yellow stickers marking signature lines. He pulled out the first pages. "This is basically authorization so I can handle certain things if you ever need me to. Need you to do what Property issues, banking, insurance, whatever comes up. Whatever comes up sounds broad. He laughed lightly. You worked payroll for 30 years. Don't start cross-examining me. I worked payroll for 32 years. That's exactly why I'm asking questions. His smile tightened. He pushed another document toward me. This doesn't change anything for you. I looked at the first page. There was enough legal language to make my eyes slow down. Authority, property, financial transactions, agents, successors. I turned to the next page. Michael reached across the table. You don't need to read every paragraph right now. I already had someone look at it. Who? A professional. What professional? He hesitated. Someone familiar with this kind of planning. I looked up. A lawyer. Not exactly. That answer bothered me. I continued reading. Michael leaned back. Mom, this is standard stuff. Then there shouldn't be any problem with me reading it. There isn't. But his voice said otherwise. I turned another page. What does this section mean? Which one? This language about property transactions. It just gives flexibility. To whom? To me, if necessary. Necessary for what? He exhaled. You're making this more complicated than it is. No. I'm asking what a document means before I put my signature on it. Michael rubbed his forehead. It's about protecting the house. There it was. The exact idea Noah had heard. I forced myself not to react. Protecting it from what future complications? What complications? Probate, medical issues, taxes, things change. He spoke faster now. You don't want something to happen and leave me trying to straighten everything out from scratch. I have a will. I know. I have insurance. I know. My bills are paid automatically. I know, Mom. Then what problem are these papers solving? Michael looked at me for a long moment. His patience was thinning. I'm trying to help you, and I'm trying to understand your help. He pulled another document from the folder. This part creates additional flexibility around the property. Again that word. Flexibility. Not ownership, not borrowing, not collateral, just flexibility. I remembered Noah whispering in the garage. Equity, collateral, after Christmas. I looked down at the yellow signature tabs. How soon do you need these? Michael's expression changed. Soon. How soon? Before the end of the year would be ideal. That's only a few days away. I know. Why the rush? There are people trying to close out paperwork before January. What people? He paused. The lawyer. The lender. Everybody. Lender. That single word changed the temperature in the room. I looked directly at him. What lender? Michael froze for perhaps half a second. Then he shook his head. I'm speaking generally. No, you weren't, Mom. You said the lender. Which lender? He pushed his chair back slightly. This is exactly what I didn't want. What you getting nervous over terminology you don't understand? The insult was subtle. Maybe he didn't even realize he had made it. But I heard it. I had managed payroll records involving thousands of employees. I had reconciled accounts where a misplaced decimal could become a very expensive mistake. Yet my son was suddenly explaining that I shouldn't worry my aging head about terminology. I closed the folder. I'm not signing today. His face hardened. Why not? Because I haven't read everything. I just explained it. You summarized it. What's the difference? A signature. Silence. Michael stood and walked toward the window. You know I'm the one who's going to have to deal with all of this someday. All of what? The house. Your accounts. Everything. Someday. He turned. You know what I mean. I do. I kept my voice calm. That's why I'm confused about why someday suddenly has a deadline before New Year's. Michael stared at me. For the first time I saw something behind his irritation. Fear. It appeared quickly and disappeared. But I saw it. I stood. Why does my house matter so much to you? He blinked. What you heard me. It doesn't. Then why are we discussing property authorization 2 days after Christmas? Because I'm trying to be responsible. Responsible people answer questions. His jaw tightened. I don't appreciate what you're implying. I haven't implied anything. You're acting like I'm trying to steal your house. The words hit me because I had never said them. I studied his face. Are you? His expression changed completely. Jesus, Mom. He began gathering the documents. I placed my hand on the red folder. Leave these. He looked at my hand. What, you brought papers asking for my signature? I want copies. I can bring them back after number leave them. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then Michael pulled out the documents and placed them on the table. Fine. He grabbed the empty folder. At the doorway he turned. I'm trying to make things easier for you. Then give me time to understand them. You always trusted me before. That hurt. Because he was right. I did. The word came out more quietly than I intended. Michael looked at me, but I didn't take it back. He left without finishing his coffee. I stood at the window and watched his SUV disappear down the street. Then I returned to the kitchen. The papers were still spread across the table. I examined the dates printed near the bottom. One document had been prepared 9 days before Christmas. Another 11 days before. I sat down slowly. So while I had been shopping for Noah's sweater and wrapping Lily's presents, Michael had already been preparing documents involving my house. Before his Christmas toast. Before Noah's note. Before he walked into my kitchen pretending this was simply responsible planning. I touched one of the yellow signature tabs. My name had been printed neatly beneath the line. Scarlett Gonzalez. Everything was ready. All that was missing was my signature. And for the first time in my life, I looked at paperwork brought to me by my own son and wondered what would happen if I gave him exactly what he wanted. Then I wondered something even worse. What had Michael already done before asking me the number that didn't belong? I waited until Michael's SUV disappeared before I touched the papers again. Then I called Diane Mitchell. Diane and I had been friends for almost 25 years. We met through a hospital fundraiser when our husbands were still alive, and somehow our friendship survived. Widowhood, retirement, bad knees, changing neighborhoods, and more cups of coffee than either of us could count. More importantly, Diane had spent 38 years in banking. If anyone could look at a stack of financial paperwork and tell me whether I was overreacting, it was her. She answered on the third ring. Scarlett, if you're calling to offer me leftover fruitcake, the answer is no. Despite everything, I laughed. I need you to look at something. Her voice changed immediately. What happened, I don't know yet. That was the truth. An hour later, Diane was sitting at my kitchen table with reading glasses low on her nose and Michael's documents spread in front of her. I told her everything. The Christmas toast, Noah's note, what he had overheard, Michael arriving with the red folder. I watched Diane's expression grow more serious with every detail. When I finished, she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she picked up the first document again. You didn't sign anything, no. Good. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. Diane, am I being paranoid? She looked at me over her glasses. I spent almost 4 decades watching people sign things they didn't understand because the person across the desk told them it was routine. She tapped the paper. Routine paperwork can still give someone very real authority. What authority? I'm not your attorney, Scarlett, and I'm not going to pretend I am. But this language is broad. She turned the document toward me. This section isn't just about paying your electric bill if you're in the hospital. It deals with property and financial transactions. Michael said it was for emergencies. Then why isn't it limited to emergencies? That question sat between us. Diane moved to another page. And this. What this references authority connected to property management. She shook her head. I don't like documents that are broader than the explanation given to the person being asked to sign them. I stared at Michael's name. He's my son. I know. He wouldn't steal from me. I didn't say he would. But you're thinking it. No. Diane removed her glasses. I'm thinking you should never have to rely on somebody's character when a legal document can simply state exactly what they are and are not allowed to do. That sounded like something David would have appreciated. Clear, practical, unemotional. Diane leaned back. You said Noah heard the word collateral, yes. And equity, yes. Has Michael talked to you about borrowing against the house? Never. Refinancing, number, adding him to the deed, number, transferring ownership, number. She looked at the papers again. Then I wouldn't sign a single thing until Charles sees all of this. Charles Whitaker had handled estate planning for David and me years earlier. I'll call him. Today. I nodded. Diane wasn't finished. Now I want you to check something else. What? Your financial records. She helped me bring my laptop to the kitchen table. We started with my bank accounts. Nothing looked wrong. No unexplained withdrawals. No strange transfers. My retirement deposits were where they should be. For a moment I felt ridiculous. Maybe I had allowed one frightened teenager's note to turn ordinary estate planning into something sinister. Then Diane asked me to pull up recent credit and property-related correspondence. I opened a folder where I stored electronic notices. Most were ordinary. Insurance, taxes, a notice about updated privacy policies. Then Diane pointed at the screen. What's that? I clicked. The document referred to a preliminary property valuation inquiry connected to my address. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't request this. You're sure I think I would remember asking someone to value my own house? Diane leaned closer. The inquiry wasn't a completed loan application. It didn't say money had been borrowed, but my address was there. So was a reference number and a date. December 16, before Christmas. Before Michael brought me the papers. Before Noah warned me. Diane wrote the reference number on a notepad. Call them. My mouth had gone dry. What do I say? The truth. You're the property owner and you want to understand why your address appears in their system, I called. After navigating an automated menu, I reached a woman who introduced herself as a customer service representative. I gave her my name and the reference number. There was typing on the other end. Can you confirm the property address? I did. More typing. I see a preliminary inquiry associated with that property. I didn't make it. There was a pause. Was a loan opened? I'm not able to discuss information connected to another party. Another party. I looked at Diane. She had heard it too. I own the house. I understand, ma'am. Then who asked about its value? I'm sorry, but I can't release identifying information. Can you tell me whether there is a mortgage application in my name? Another pause. I don't see a completed loan under your name from this inquiry. Relief came, but only briefly. Then what exactly happened? I can tell you, the property address was submitted as part of a preliminary lending inquiry, and an estimated valuation was requested. My fingers tightened around the phone. Was permission from the owner required for a preliminary estimate based on public and market information? Not necessarily. That explained how someone could do it. It didn't explain why. I thanked her and hung up. For several seconds neither Diane nor I spoke. Finally I said, someone wanted to know what my house was worth. Yes, before asking me. Yes. I stood and walked to the window. My backyard looked gray under the winter sky. David's old shed stood near the fence. For years the house had represented security. We had paid for it one paycheck at a time. David had worked overtime during summers when city projects ran late. I had taken extra shifts during payroll conversions. Every mortgage payment had represented hours of our lives. And now someone had reduced all of that to an estimated market value. A source of equity. Collateral. I felt anger beginning to replace fear. Maybe it wasn't Michael. Diane didn't answer. I turned. Say it. I don't know who requested it. But the timing matters. December 16. The prepared documents. Noah overhearing Michael. The lender slipping into his explanation. It was becoming harder to believe in coincidence. My phone rang. Michael. His name appeared on the screen. Diane and I looked at each other. Answer it, she said quietly. I did. Hello, hey mom. Michael sounded cheerful. I just wanted to see if you'd had a chance to look over everything. It's been a couple of hours. I know. I'm just checking. I'm still reading. He paused. You know I wouldn't put anything in front of you that could hurt you. I looked at the reference number Diane had written down. December 16th. I know what you're telling me. Another pause. It was small, but I noticed it. So when can we finish this? Finish what? The signatures. I haven't decided whether I'm signing. His voice tightened. Mom, we talked about this. No. You talked. I listened. Why are you suddenly making this difficult? Suddenly. That word made me angry. As though ownership of my own house was an inconvenience I had introduced into his schedule. I'll call you when I'm ready. Scarlett Michael almost never called me Scarlett. I ended the call. My hand was trembling. Diane reached across the table and covered it with hers. You need Charles. I nodded. This time I didn't hesitate. I called his office. His assistant said he was booked until after New Year's. But when I explained that the matter involved unexpected property documents, she put me on hold. A few minutes later, Charles himself came on the line. Scarlett, hearing his familiar voice, nearly broke something in me. Charles, I think Michael is trying to get authority over my house. There was silence. Then his tone became very calm. Tell me exactly what happened. I did. When I finished, Charles asked only one question. Did you sign anything? No. Good. I heard papers moving on his end. Bring me everything. The documents, the inquiry number. Any old authorizations. Michael may have had all of it. When tomorrow morning? I swallowed. Charles, am I in? I don't know yet. That answer frightened me more than reassurance would have. Then he added firmly, but until I do know, Scarlett, don't sign a single page. I looked down at Michael's papers. For the first time, they no longer looked like documents. They looked like pieces of a plan. And somewhere inside them was the answer to a question I was becoming afraid to ask. How far had my son already gone before he ever came to me? My son's perfect life wasn't perfect. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael sitting at my kitchen table tapping those yellow signature tabs, as though my name belonged there simply because he had decided it should. But underneath my anger was another feeling. Fear. Not fear of losing my house. Not yet. Fear of what could make my son desperate enough to risk our relationship over it. Michael had always cared about appearing successful. As a boy, he hated admitting when he struggled. If he got a C on a test, he would hide it until I found the paper crushed beneath his bed. If he lost a baseball game, he blamed the weather before admitting the other team had played better. David used to say that boy would rather carry a refrigerator uphill than let somebody see him ask for help. For years, I thought adulthood had softened that pride. Maybe I was wrong. The next morning before my appointment with Charles, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and began writing down every conversation about money I could remember having with Michael during the previous year. At first, nothing seemed unusual, then patterns appeared. One Sunday in March. Michael had asked whether I still owed anything on the house. I had told him the remaining balance was small. He whistled. You know what houses around here are selling for now? I laughed. I'm planning to live in mine, not sell it. At the time, the conversation had seemed harmless. Then there was July. Michael had been helping me move a bookcase when he casually asked whether David and I had ever opened a home equity line. No, I said. Never. No reason to. He nodded as if it meant nothing. In September, he sent me an article about rising property values in Richmond. In November, he suggested I have the house professionally appraised for estate planning. I had ignored the message. Now those moments looked different. Michael hadn't suddenly become interested in my house after Christmas. He had been studying it for months. I called Diane. I think he's been asking about my equity all year. She was quiet. Write everything down. I already am. Good. Then she said something I didn't want to hear. Scarlett, you need to find out what's happening with Michael financially. How start with what you already know. So I did. Michael had spent nearly 20 years in medical equipment sales. He understood hospitals' procurement, distributors, and contracts. About 18 months earlier, he had told me he was investing in a medical supply distribution company with an old colleague. I remembered how excited he had been. This could be the thing that changes everything, he told me. I had smiled. I thought things were already pretty good. They are. But this could give us real freedom. At the time, I hadn't asked what real freedom meant. I knew he had invested money. I didn't know how much. I also remembered that the venture had stopped appearing in conversation. That was unusual for Michael. When things went well, he talked. When they went badly, he edited. I searched through old messages. There it was. A photograph Michael had sent me months earlier of himself standing beside another man beneath the company's banner at a trade event. I remembered the man. Jason, Michael's business partner. I didn't call Jason. That would have crossed a line I wasn't ready to cross. Instead, I looked through information Michael himself had shared publicly over the previous year. The company had once posted regularly new contracts, new warehouse space, new partnerships. Then the updates stopped. Months earlier, I called Diane again. The company looks dead. That doesn't necessarily mean Michael owes money. I know, but pieces were gathering. I remembered Michael complaining about interest rates. I remembered Emily mentioning that they had postponed renovating their kitchen, even though she had already designed it. I remembered Michael selling a boat he had bought only 2 summers earlier. At Thanksgiving, he had joked that maintaining it was more trouble than it was worth. Maybe it hadn't been a joke. That afternoon, I received a call from someone I hadn't expected. Emily. Scarlett. Have you talked to Michael today? Not today. There was a pause. Okay. Is something wrong? No. He's just stressed. About what work? Her answer came too quickly. What kind of work? Another pause. You know Michael, he takes everything personally. I almost told her what I knew. I didn't. Not yet. Is the distribution business doing all right? Silence. That silence told me more than her words. I think Michael wishes he'd never gotten involved, she finally said. How bad is it? I don't know. You're his wife. I know that. There was frustration in her voice now. He doesn't tell me everything. Neither do I thought. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone. Michael was hiding something from both of us. Over the next several days, the outline became clearer. Not through one dramatic discovery, but through fragments Michael had left behind. The distribution venture had failed. He had personally guaranteed obligations connected to it. He had put far more of his own money into keeping it alive than anyone in the family knew. And he was carrying substantial debt. Worse, his own house was no longer the financial safety net it appeared to be. Michael and Emily had already borrowed heavily against their equity. That explained why he needed mine. My house was different. David and I had bought it decades ago. The remaining mortgage was minimal. Property values had risen dramatically. To Michael, my home wasn't merely the place where his father had once grilled hamburgers in the backyard. It was usable equity, a solution, collateral. The word made me feel sick. By late afternoon, I was sitting alone in my living room with my notes spread across the coffee table. I kept searching for a version of the story that made Michael innocent. Maybe he intended to ask permission eventually. Maybe he believed the paperwork was genuinely protective. Maybe he planned to explain everything after the holidays. But then I remembered Noah's exact words. Once Mom signs the transfer, we can finally fix this. Not if she signs. Once she signs. Michael had already counted my agreement as part of his rescue plan. I walked to the mantel. A photograph of him at 17 sat beside one of David. Michael had his graduation gown half open, his hair too long, his smile enormous. I picked up the frame. "What happened to you?" I whispered. Then I immediately regretted saying it. Because Michael wasn't a monster. That would have been easier. He was scared, he was ashamed, and he was desperate. I understood desperation. I remembered years when David and I had worried about bills. I remembered lying awake calculating how long our savings would last if one of us lost a job. Fear could make decent people behave badly. But there was a difference between asking your mother for help and quietly positioning her home as the answer to your problems. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Have you signed the papers yet?" I stared at the message. No hello. No, how are you? Just the papers. I typed no. 3 dots appeared immediately. Why not? I answered, because I still have questions. His response took longer. "Mom, there's a deadline. I really need you to trust me." There it was. A deadline. I typed one final message. Trust and signatures are not the same thing. He didn't respond. I placed the phone face down. For most of Michael's life when he fell, I had reached out before he hit the ground. Money, advice, a spare room, a second chance. Perhaps that was why he believed I would do it again. But this time, the thing he wanted me to put beneath him wasn't a few $1,000s. It was the home David and I had spent decades building. And for the first time, I understood the terrible truth. My son's perfect life was already cracking. The expensive dinners, the beautiful house, the confident Christmas toast, all of it had hidden a financial disaster he was terrified to admit. Michael wasn't asking for my house because he wanted more. He was reaching for it because he was afraid of losing everything he already had. And desperation made people dangerous in ways greed sometimes didn't, because a greedy man knows he wants what belongs to you. A desperate man can convince himself that taking it is necessary. The Christmas lie. For the next 2 days I kept returning to Michael's Christmas toast. Not because it had embarrassed me. At 68, embarrassment passes faster than it did when I was 28. What stayed with me was the precision of it. Michael hadn't simply forgotten to thank me. He had told a story, and in that story I had been carefully removed. I could still see him standing at the head of that beautiful dining table holding his wineglass, while Robert and Susan smiled. To the two people who always made sure we had what we needed. That was what Michael had said. At the time, the words had hurt. Now they disturbed me, because I knew they weren't true. Robert and Susan had certainly helped Michael and Emily. They bought generous birthday presents. They paid for family vacations more than once. Robert introduced Michael to business contacts. Susan helped Emily find clients when her design business was young. But when Michael needed $45,000 to close on his first house, Robert hadn't written that check. I had. When Michael lost his job and couldn't make the mortgage, Susan hadn't covered 3 months of payments. I had. And when Noah and Lily someday opened the education accounts that would help them through college, the money inside wouldn't have come from the Bennetts. It would have come from the quiet monthly transfers I had made for years. None of that made me better than Robert or Susan, but it made Michael's version of history false. That afternoon, I opened the filing cabinet in my spare bedroom. David used to tease me about keeping everything: receipts, statements, tax documents, canceled checks. If the government ever wants to know what we bought for lunch in 1998, he once said, Scarlett will have documentation. I smiled at the memory. Then I began pulling files. The $45,000 transfer was easy to find. I remembered the date because Michael had closed on the house 3 days later. There it was, a transfer from my savings account, $45,000. I placed the statement on the desk. Next came the mortgage payments from the year Michael lost his job. 3 electronic transfers. Then the records for Noah and Lily's education accounts. Then smaller things. A furnace repair. A medical bill. Money I had sent when Michael said a commission check had been delayed. I stopped after a while. The pile made me uncomfortable, not because I regretted any of it, because seeing those years reduced to numbers made my love look transactional. That was never what I intended. I sat back and closed my eyes. Don't turn into an accountant now, I could almost hear David say. I was an accountant when you married me, I whispered. But I understood what the imaginary version of my husband meant. This wasn't about proving Michael owed me. He didn't. The money had been given freely. What bothered me was why he needed everyone to believe it had never happened. I thought about Emily. How much did she know years earlier when I gave Michael the down payment? Emily hugged me and thanked me. But over time I noticed something odd. She sometimes referred to those early years as though she and Michael had managed entirely by themselves. We started with nothing, she once told friends at a barbecue. Michael had been standing beside her. He said nothing. Had she forgotten, or had Michael gradually changed the story, even inside his own marriage? I called Diane. I think the Christmas speech was part of this. Part of what keeping everyone from knowing how much help he's already had. Diane was quiet. Then she said, Why would that matter? Because if Robert finds out Michael took money from me for years and still ended up buried in debt, what's the first question he'll ask? Where did the money go? Exactly. The answer settled heavily between us. Michael had always wanted Robert's respect. I had watched it grow over the years. At first it seemed natural. David had been gone a long time and Robert was an older man with business experience. Michael asked his advice. Then admiration became performance. Michael bought a more expensive car, joined Robert's club, started talking about investments at dinner. When Robert mentioned a vacation in Napa, Michael booked one the following year. It was as though my son had spent years auditioning for a role in a family wealthier than the one he came from. And I represented the part of his story he no longer wanted emphasized: the payroll clerk mother, the city worker father, the modest house, the $45,000 check he had needed because he couldn't afford his own down payment. I suddenly remembered a dinner from the previous spring. Robert had complimented Michael on his financial discipline. "Al built a lot in 15 years, he said. Michael smiled. We were careful. I had almost spoken. Almost. Then Michael looked at me. There had been something in that look. A request. Please don't. So I hadn't. At the time I thought I was protecting his pride. Now I wondered whether I had been protecting a lie. That realization hurt more than being ignored at Christmas, because I had participated without knowing it. Every time I stayed quiet, Michael learned that silence was available to him. Every time I refused credit, he became freer to assign it somewhere else. Every time I protected him from embarrassment, I made it easier for him to pretend he had never needed protecting. My phone rang late that afternoon. Robert Bennett. I almost didn't answer. Scarlett, Merry Christmas again. Merry Christmas, Robert. I hope Michael didn't offend you the other night. My heart skipped. What do you mean the toast? I waited. Robert chuckled. Susan told him afterward he should have thanked you too. You're his mother after all. His mother. Not the woman who had financed part of the life being celebrated. Just his mother. It was his toast, I said. Well, he's always been grateful to us. Maybe too grateful sometimes. I stared at the $45,000 transfer on my desk. Robert, can I ask you something? Of course. When Michael and Emily bought their first house, do you remember helping with the down payment? There was silence. No. Then he laughed uncertainly. I think they handled that themselves. There it was. I felt strangely calm. And when Michael lost his job, that was rough. But he got through it. Always admired that about him. I closed my eyes. Michael hadn't merely avoided discussing my help. He had allowed Robert to believe there had been no help at all. I changed the subject and ended the call politely. Then I sat alone for a long time. I wasn't angry with Robert. He couldn't know what no one had told him. And suddenly Michael's Christmas toast made perfect sense. He wasn't thanking the Bennetts. He was reinforcing the story he had spent years building. A story in which he was successful, independent, and financially disciplined. A story that could not survive if people discovered how many times his mother had quietly caught him before he fell. And now he was falling again. Only this time, $45,000 wouldn't be enough. This time he needed the equity in my house. I looked at the pile of records. For years I had believed love meant never keeping score. I still believed that. But telling the truth was not keeping score. Protecting myself was not revenge. And refusing to participate in another lie did not make me a bad mother. I gathered the statements and placed them in a folder. Not to humiliate Michael. Not to demand repayment. Not to prove that I had done more than Robert and Susan. I wanted only one thing: the truth available when I needed it. Because Michael had already changed the story once. I wasn't going to let him change it again. That evening I stood beside my Christmas tree and looked at the presents still waiting for family members who hadn't visited yet. One small package beneath the tree had Michael's name on it. I had bought him a leather briefcase. For years, giving him things had been one of the easiest ways I knew to love him. Now I understood that loving him might require something much harder: saying no. And somewhere inside me, beneath the hurt and disappointment, a decision was forming. I would not expose Michael simply to punish him. But if he tried to use my silence against me, I would stop protecting the version of himself he had created. He had spent years rewriting our family's history. If necessary, I would simply put the original records on the table and let the truth speak for itself. The second warning. 3 days before New Year's, Noah showed up at my house alone. I was taking down a few Christmas decorations when I heard the doorbell. Through the window, I saw him standing on the porch with his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his winter jacket. The moment I opened the door, I knew this wasn't a social visit. "Where are your parents?" "Mom dropped me at Tyler's. Tyler lives 3 blocks away." "I know." That told me enough. I stepped aside. "Come in." Noah walked directly into the living room but didn't remove his coat. I watched him glance toward the windows. "Noah." He looked at me. "You're making me nervous. I'm sorry. What happened?" He sat on the edge of the sofa. For a few seconds he stared at his shoes. Then he said, "Dad was talking about your house again." I sat beside him. "What did I tell you about listening to adult conversations I wasn't trying to?" He sounded defensive. "I came downstairs last night because I was hungry. Dad was in the kitchen talking on the phone. Did he see you?" "No." "What did you hear?" Noah hesitated. "I don't want to make things worse. You're not responsible for making anything better or worse." I softened my voice. "But if you already heard something you think affects me, tell me. After that, you stay out of it." He nodded. "Dad said, by New Year's I'll have control of the property." The room seemed to become very still. Those exact words. Yes. Control of the property. Yes. I looked toward my Christmas tree. Only half the lights were still working. David used to complain every year that Christmas lights were designed by people who hated humanity. Usually that memory made me smile. It didn't that day. Did he say my name? No. But then he said, "My mother just needs time to calm down." That removed any doubt. "What else?" He said something about documents. "Anything specific?" Noah shook his head. He told whoever he was talking to that everything would be handled before the deadline. The deadline again. Michael had mentioned one in his text. Whatever financial problem he was facing, time was running out. Noah rubbed his palms against his jeans. "I shouldn't have listened." "No, I know. But you did hear it." He nodded. "And you told me. Now your part is finished." His face tightened. "What if Dad gets mad at you at everybody?" I studied him. There was something in Noah's expression I recognized. Fear mixed with disappointment. It is a painful thing to watch a child discover that his parent is imperfect. We all know it eventually. But 15 is too young to learn it through whispered conversations about money and deception. "Noah, your father loves you." He looked away. "I know. And whatever he's doing right now doesn't erase every good thing he's ever done." "Then why is he doing it?" There are questions children ask that adults cannot answer without either lying or causing damage. I chose the narrow path between them. Sometimes people get scared. Dad doesn't get scared. I almost smiled. Everybody gets scared. Not like this. Especially like this. I took his hand. When adults are afraid of losing something, money, a job, a reputation, they can convince themselves that something wrong is necessary. Noah frowned. "So Dad thinks taking your house is necessary?" "I didn't say he's taking my house, but he wants control of it." "That's what we need to understand." "Are you going to ask him when I know exactly what he's asking me to give him?" Noah looked toward the hallway. His eyes landed on an old photograph of Michael hanging beside the stairs. He was around Noah's age in it. That photograph had been taken during a family trip to Virginia Beach. David stood behind him with both hands on Michael's shoulders. Noah stared at it. "Dad looks like me. He was skinnier." That earned a small laugh. "He'd hate you saying that. He was. Your father could turn sideways and disappear." Noah smiled briefly. Then his expression became serious again. "Was he different? Your dad?" "Yeah. I thought about it. He was always proud. Proud like good proud, both kinds." Noah waited. He wanted to succeed. That can be a wonderful thing. But sometimes your father has trouble admitting when he needs help. "He lies." The word came sharply. I squeezed his hand. "Don't make your father into one bad decision. It's more than one." I couldn't argue. Noah listened to me carefully. He did. "You are his son. You are not his judge, his investigator, or my protector." "But what if nobody had told you?" That question pierced me, because the truth was simple. Without Noah's note, I might have signed. Michael had been my son for 43 years. If he had walked into my kitchen before Christmas and said those documents were routine, perhaps I would have trusted him. Perhaps I would have signed where the yellow tabs told me. The thought frightened me. You did something important, I said. You warned me. Then let me keep helping. No. Grandma Noah. I turned toward him fully. This is where helping stops. His eyes filled with frustration. I can find out who Dad was talking to. I don't want you to. I could check his office. Absolutely not. He leaves papers everywhere. You will not touch them. But you don't need to become dishonest to expose dishonesty. That stopped him. I let the silence settle. I'm serious. No searching. No listening at doors. No reading messages. Nothing. He nodded reluctantly. I just don't want you to lose this house. His voice broke slightly. That nearly broke me too. Noah had spent half his childhood here. He had learned to ride a bicycle on my driveway. He and David had planted a maple tree in the backyard when Noah was 4. After David died, Noah asked me if Grandpa could still see the tree growing. The house belonged to my memories, but some of those memories belonged to Noah too. Look at me. He did. Are you going to lose your house? He asked. This time I understood that he wasn't asking about property law. I was asking whether the adults around him could still keep something safe. I took both his hands. No, sweetheart. You promise? Not while I still have a choice. He searched my face. And I still have a choice. His shoulders finally relaxed. I made him hot chocolate before he left. We talked about school, basketball. A girl named Madison he claimed he absolutely did not like, which convinced me immediately that he liked her very much. For 20 minutes he was 15 again. That was the best gift I could give him. When it was time to go, I drove him the 3 blocks to Tyler's house. Before getting out, Noah turned toward me. Grandma. Yes, don't tell Dad I told you. I won't involve you. He nodded. Then he hugged me. Not the casual one-armed hug teenagers give adults. A real hug. Be careful. I watched him walk toward Tyler's door. On the drive home, Michael's words followed me. By New Year's, I'll have control of the property. Control. Not help. Not protection. Control. When I got home, I walked directly to the kitchen drawer where I had locked Noah's first note. I took it out and placed it beside Michael's documents. One frightened boy's handwriting beside 20 pages of polished legal language. Somehow the handwritten note felt more truthful. I picked up my phone and called Charles Whitaker. His assistant answered. This is Scarlett Gonzalez. I need the earliest appointment Charles can give me. Ms. Gonzalez, I believe he has you scheduled. I need sooner. She must have heard something in my voice. Let me check. A minute later she returned. He can see you tomorrow at 8:30. I'll be there. After hanging up, I gathered everything. Michael's documents, the property inquiry, my old financial records, the notes I had made about his questions over the past year. Then I put them into a folder of my own. Not red, blue. David always used blue folders for important papers. I smiled when I realized I had unconsciously chosen one. That night before going upstairs, I checked the locks twice. I knew Michael couldn't simply walk in and take my house. But betrayal changes ordinary things. A door becomes something you check. A signature becomes something you protect. A question becomes something you examine for what is hiding beneath it. For 43 years, Michael had been my son before he was anything else. Now, for the first time, I needed to understand what authority he believed he was entitled to have over me. And the next morning, I was going to put every piece of paper in front of Charles Whitaker and ask him the question I had been afraid to ask from the beginning. If I had trusted Michael and signed everything he brought me, what exactly could my son have done with my home, what Charles found? At 8:25 the next morning, I was sitting in Charles Whitaker's waiting room with the blue folder clutched against my chest. I had known Charles for nearly 30 years. He had helped David and me write our first wills. He had handled the paperwork after David died. He knew where the house came from, what we had paid for it, and how fiercely David believed I should never have to worry about money after he was gone. That history made what I was about to tell him feel almost like a confession. At exactly 8:30, Charles opened his office door. Scarlett. He was 71 now, with silver hair and the same dark-framed glasses he had worn for years. He took one look at my face. "Come in." I sat across from his desk and placed the blue folder between us. Charles didn't waste time. "Start at Christmas." So I did. I told him about Michael's toast, Noah's first warning, the conversation Noah had overheard between Michael and Emily, the red folder, Michael mentioning a lender, the preliminary property valuation, the deadline. Then I told him what Noah had heard most recently. "By New Year's, I'll have control of the property." Charles stopped writing. Those were Michael's words, according to Noah. How old is Noah? 15. And you believe he understood what he heard? I believe he repeated the sentence accurately. Charles nodded. "Show me the documents." I handed them over. Then I waited and waited. Charles read slowly. Unlike Michael, he didn't skip paragraphs. He made notes in the margins of a legal pad. Occasionally, he went back to an earlier page and compared language. The silence became unbearable. Finally, I asked, "Is he trying to take my house?" Charles removed his glasses. "Not with one signature on one page, no." I exhaled. Then he raised a finger. "That does not mean I like what I'm seeing." My relief disappeared. "What do you mean these documents are structured broadly?" Diane said that too. She was right. He turned several pages toward me. "This one expands authority over financial matters. This section addresses property management. This one creates additional discretion regarding transactions involving assets. Can Michael sell my house? Not simply by waving these pages around tomorrow. Can he borrow against it?" Charles leaned back. "The danger is not that one document explicitly says Scarlett gives Michael permission to mortgage her house. The danger is what these authorities could allow when combined with other documentation or arrangements." I stared at him. So Michael was lying. "I can't tell you what Michael believes." "Charles," he sighed, "I can tell you his explanation that this merely helps him pay bills during an emergency is incomplete." That hurt more than I expected. I looked down. What could he do? If you signed everything without restriction, Michael could gain substantial authority over your financial affairs. Depending on what additional arrangements were made, that authority could potentially be used to facilitate a refinancing transaction involving the property. Collateral. Charles looked at me sharply. Yes. Noah heard that word. I remember. I felt cold. So this could be about his debt. It could. And if something went wrong, then your home could be exposed to consequences that currently have nothing to do with you. So this could be about his debt. It could. And if something went wrong, then your home could be exposed to consequences that currently have nothing to do with you. My hands began trembling. Charles noticed. "Scarlett, listen to me. You haven't signed." "I almost did. But you didn't. If Noah hadn't written that note..." I couldn't finish. Charles waited. For years I had told Noah stories about his grandfather protecting this house. David repairing the roof himself because we couldn't afford contractors. David working overtime to make extra principal payments. And I had nearly put all of it at risk because my son brought me a folder and said, "Trust me." Charles reached across the desk. "We deal with what happened, not what almost happened." I nodded. "What do I do now?" "First, you sign nothing Michael gives you. That part is easy. Second, I want to review any authority he may already have." My stomach tightened. What authority? Power of attorney, account access, property records, anything you signed after David died. I stared at him. After David's death, I had barely been able to think. Michael had stepped in. He helped cancel accounts. He dealt with insurance companies. He organized documents. I remembered sitting at this very desk while Charles explained paperwork to me. "Michael had some limited authorization," I said. Charles nodded slowly. "I remember preparing a power of attorney years ago. Was it broad? Not as broad as these documents, but I don't want to rely on memory. I'll pull the file." He called his assistant. A few minutes later, an older file was brought in. Charles began reading. I watched his expression. "Here." He pointed to a page. "You appointed Michael as an alternate agent for certain financial matters." Alternate, yes. Originally, David was primary. After his death, we updated parts of the arrangement. Does Michael have authority now? Potentially in limited circumstances. But I'm not comfortable leaving anything ambiguous. Then remove him. The words came out immediately. Charles looked at me. Are you sure I thought of Michael asking whether my mortgage was paid? The valuation inquiry? The yellow signature tabs? Yes. All right. He made another note. We'll prepare revocations and updated documents. Then Charles asked a question I wasn't expecting. Has Michael ever had access to copies of your financial records? I frowned. What kind? Tax returns, property documents, insurance information, mortgage statements. I started to answer no. Then I remembered. After David died, Michael had spent several weekends helping me organize the study. Boxes of papers had covered the floor. I had given him folders to copy. Tax returns, insurance policies, the deed, mortgage statements. Even my Social Security and retirement paperwork had been mixed into those boxes. Yes. How much? A lot. Does he still have copies? I don't know. Charles became very still. What I'm thinking. That's never comforting when lawyers say it. He almost smiled. Scarlett, the property valuation itself isn't necessarily illegal. Much of a property's basic information is public. But if Michael has old financial documents, he knows more than a stranger would. How much I owe? Yes. My insurance. Yes. My income, potentially, and the value of the house, approximately. I felt suddenly exposed. Not because a criminal had broken into my filing cabinet, because years earlier I had opened it willingly for my son. I trusted him. Charles's expression softened. Of course you did. I handed him everything. You handed your son documents while you were grieving. That isn't foolish. But now those documents could help him do this. They could help him understand your financial position. I looked at the red folder papers. So the new documents weren't the beginning. Maybe not. That possibility frightened me. Michael might have spent months calculating what my home could solve, and I had given him the numbers years earlier. Charles began making a list. We'll update your power of attorney. We'll notify relevant financial institutions. I want your account security reviewed. We should also make sure no property-related authorization exists that you've forgotten. Can we stop him? Charles looked directly at me. If you don't consent, Michael does not get to treat your property as his solution. Something inside me loosened. Not completely, but enough to breathe. Then Charles added, there's another issue. My stomach dropped again. What Michael appears to believe you're eventually going to cooperate. I know. That matters. Why? Because desperate people sometimes interpret hesitation as negotiation. I thought about Michael's text. There's a deadline. I really need you to trust me. What should I tell him? For now, very little. Charles gathered the documents. Let me secure your legal position first. I nodded. Then I looked toward the window. Charles David would be furious. Yes. I turned back. You didn't even hesitate. I knew David. That made me laugh despite myself. Charles smiled. Your husband once argued with me for 20 minutes over a clause in your will because he thought it didn't protect you strongly enough. I remembered. That was David. Charles placed his hand on the blue folder. He wanted you secure. My eyes burned. I thought Michael wanted that too. Charles didn't answer. There was nothing kind he could say. As I stood to leave, he gave me copies of the steps we would take. At the door, I stopped. If Michael asks whether I came here, you're not required to tell him anything. I nodded. Outside, the December air hit my face. For the first time since Christmas, I felt less helpless. I knew what Michael's papers could do. I knew I hadn't signed them. And now Charles was closing the doors Michael might already have had access to. But one question followed me all the way home. Michael had once possessed copies of almost every important financial document in my life. He knew my income, he knew my mortgage, he knew my property, he knew exactly how much security David and I had spent decades building. And if Noah was right, Michael wasn't merely hoping I would help him. He was already speaking as though control of my property was inevitable. The trust I had given him years ago had become the weakest point in everything I owned. And I was beginning to understand that before I could protect my house, I first had to take back the access I had once given my son out of love. Emily came to my door. Emily came to my house the following afternoon without calling first. When I saw her car pull into the driveway, my first thought was that Michael had sent her. My second was that Charles had moved faster than expected, and Michael had discovered I was revoking his financial authority. Either way, I prepared myself for an argument. Emily stepped onto the porch wearing jeans boots and a gray coat. No makeup. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. That alone worried me. Emily rarely left her house looking unprepared. I opened the door. "Where's Michael at work?" She glanced behind her. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Emily walked into the living room but didn't remove her coat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned toward me. "Did Michael ask you to sign papers?" There was no point pretending. "Yes." Her face changed. "And you didn't?" "No." She closed her eyes. Thank God. Those were not the words I expected. "Emily, what's going on?" She sat down. Then my daughter-in-law began to cry. Not delicate tears. Her shoulders shook. I had seen Emily angry, frustrated, and exhausted. I had never seen her like that. I sat across from her. "Tell me." She covered her face. I didn't know. Know what? How bad it was. I already understood what she meant. Michael's debt. Her hands dropped. "You know I know some. How? That isn't important right now." She laughed bitterly. "Apparently nobody knowing anything is the reason we're here." I waited. Emily took several breaths. "The distribution company failed months ago." "I know. He told me they were restructuring." "What did that mean?" "Nothing. It meant he was buying time." She looked toward the window. "Michael invested more money than he told me. Then when things started going wrong, he put more in because he thought one big contract would save them. How much I still don't know the final number." That frightened me. "He personally guaranteed part of the debt," she continued, "and he borrowed against our house." I said nothing. Emily stared at me. "You knew that too," I suspected. She wiped her cheeks. "I found documents yesterday." "What documents?" "Statements. Notices. Things he had been hiding in his office." I thought of Noah. At least Emily had every right to search her own household finances. "There's a deadline in January," she said. "If Michael can't restructure part of the debt, everything gets worse. How much worse we could lose the house." There it was. The beautiful house where Michael had raised his glass on Christmas night. The dining room, the chandelier, the carefully decorated tree, the expensive life. All of it had been standing on cracking ground. Emily looked at me. "I knew he wanted to talk to you about your property." My body stiffened. "So you did know?" "Yes." The anger came immediately. "You knew he wanted my house." "No. You just said I knew he wanted to ask whether you would help us use some of the equity, without telling me why I thought he had told you." I stared at her. Emily shook her head desperately. "Scarlett, he told me you already knew." "What exactly did he say?" "He said you had offered." For a moment I couldn't speak. "Offered what?" "To help if the business ever threatened the family." "I never said that. I know that now." "No, Emily. I never even knew the business was threatening your family." Her face crumpled again. "He told me you and he had discussed it months ago. We didn't. He said the papers were just formalities." I stood. I needed distance. Michael had told me the documents were protection. I had told Emily they were formalities for help I had already offered. 2 women, 2 stories, 1 signature. I turned back. "He never asked me." Emily went still. "What Michael never came to me and said, 'Mom, I'm in debt. Will you risk your house to help me?' But the red folder. He brought it 2 days after Christmas and told me it was about simplifying my finances as I got older." Emily stared at me in disbelief. "He said that. I told me it was about protecting my house." "Oh my God. He never mentioned his business debt." She lowered her head. For several seconds the only sound was the clock in my hallway. Then Emily whispered, "I pushed him." My anger paused. "What do you mean?" When I started realizing something was wrong, I told him he had to find a solution. I told him he couldn't let the children lose their home because of his pride. That isn't the same as telling him to take mine. I know. She looked up. But what if he heard what he needed to hear? I sat again. Emily clasped her hands. I thought you were helping willingly. I didn't like it, but Michael kept saying you had plenty of equity and almost no mortgage. Those words hurt. Not because Emily said them, because Michael had. My son had apparently discussed the financial condition of my home with other people as though it were an available family resource. He told you how much I owe, yes. How did he know? I assumed you told him. I thought of the records Michael had copied after David died. Another piece fell into place. Emily continued. He said borrowing against your house temporarily was safer than letting creditors force us into something worse. Safer for whom? She looked down. Us. Exactly. And what happens to me if his plan fails? I asked him that. I leaned forward. What did he say? He said it wouldn't fail. I laughed once. There was no humor in it. Isn't that what he said about the distribution company? Emily's eyes filled again. Yes. The anger drained out of me, leaving exhaustion. For days, part of me had wondered whether Emily was the force behind Michael. Maybe the wealthy daughter had decided her mother-in-law's modest house should rescue their lifestyle. Maybe she had pressured him. But the woman sitting across from me didn't look like a conspirator. She looked like another person Michael had manipulated with selective truths. I need to ask you something, I said. Anything. On Christmas night, did you know he was bringing me papers afterward? I knew he planned to talk to you after Christmas. Did you know the documents had already been prepared? No. Did your parents know? Absolutely not. I believed her. Robert's reaction during our phone call made sense now. Emily wiped her eyes. My parents think we're fine. Michael wants them to keep thinking that. I know. And that toast. Her expression tightened. I hated that toast. I was surprised. Why? Because it wasn't true. I waited. Emily took a breath. I knew you helped with the down payment. I didn't know about everything else, but I knew that. When Michael said my parents had made everything possible, I looked at him. I noticed. He ignored me. Why didn't you correct him? Her answer was quiet. Probably for the same reason you didn't. That landed harder than any accusation. We had both protected Michael. Different ways. Same silence. Emily stood and walked toward the fireplace. I don't know what happens to my marriage after this. I didn't answer. But I know one thing. She turned. You are not risking your house. Emily, I mean it. I wasn't planning to. Good. There was steel in her voice now. I won't let him tell me again that this is something you agreed to. For the first time in years, I looked at my daughter-in-law without seeing the distance between us. I saw a wife who had discovered her husband had lied, a mother afraid for her children, a woman realizing the life she trusted might be built partly on secrets. I understood her more than I wanted to. I'm meeting with Charles, I said. Your lawyer. Yes. Emily nodded. Good. Michael doesn't know everything I've done yet. I won't tell him. Why? Because he needs to tell the truth before somebody forces it out of him. I studied her. Will you stand by that when he's angry? I don't know. It was the most honest answer she could have given. At the door, Emily stopped. My parents need to know. Yes. And Michael needs to tell them. I thought of the folder of records I had prepared. He should. But if he doesn't, I looked at her. Then I will. Emily nodded slowly. After she drove away, I remained on the porch despite the cold. For days I had believed the conflict was me against Michael and Emily. Now I understood the truth was more complicated. Michael had placed each of us inside a different version of reality. To me, the documents were protection. To Emily, they were permission I had already given. To Robert and Susan, Michael was financially successful. And to himself, perhaps he was still the man who could fix everything before anyone discovered how badly he had failed. But those separate stories were beginning to collide, and when they finally met in the same room, Michael would no longer be able to control which version of the truth we believed. The family meeting. I called Michael the next morning. We need to talk. He was quiet for a moment. About the papers, about everything. Another pause. Then his voice softened. Okay. Good. I knew once you had time to think your house. 7 o'clock tonight. Why my house? Because Emily needs to be there. His tone changed. Why does Emily need to be there, and Robert and Susan? This time the silence lasted much longer. Mom, this is between you and me. No, Michael. It stopped being between you and me when you started telling different people different versions of the same story. What are you talking about, 7 o'clock? I ended the call. My hands were steady. That surprised me. For most of my life, confrontation made me uncomfortable. David used to joke that I could negotiate payroll discrepancies involving thousands of dollars, but would apologize to a waiter for sending back cold soup. But something had changed since Christmas. Maybe betrayal does that. There comes a point when pain stops making you smaller. It makes you clear. At 6:45 that evening, I placed my blue folder on the passenger seat and drove to Michael's house. The Christmas wreath was still hanging on the front door. Through the windows, I could see the same dining room where Michael had raised his glass only days earlier. This time I wasn't arriving with presents. Emily opened the door. Her face was pale. They're all here. Michael was standing near the fireplace. Robert sat in an armchair. Susan was beside him. Noah and Lily were upstairs. At least I thought they were. Michael looked at the folder in my hand. What's that, records? His jaw tightened. Mom, whatever you think is happening, sit down. He stared at me. I had never spoken to my grown son that way. Perhaps that was why he obeyed. I sat across from him. Emily remained near the dining table. Robert looked confused. Susan looked worried. Scarlett, Robert said Michael told us there's some disagreement about estate planning. I looked at Michael. Is that what you told them? He shifted. That's essentially what this is. No. I placed the folder on the coffee table. This is about money. Susan frowned. What money? Michael leaned forward. Mom, please. I ignored him. Robert, do you remember the question I asked you after Christmas about the down payment? Yes. He nodded. I opened the folder and removed a bank statement. When Michael and Emily bought their first house, they were short on the down payment. Michael's face hardened. Why are we doing this? I placed the statement on the table. I transferred $45,000 to them. Susan looked at Michael. Robert leaned forward. 45,000, yes. Emily closed her eyes. Michael shook his head. That was years ago. I know. You gave it to us. I did. So what does it have to do with anything? Nothing if you had told the truth about it. Robert picked up the statement. I thought you two handled that yourselves. Michael rubbed his forehead. We did. Mom helped. Helped, I repeated. He looked at me. I pulled out another set of records. When Michael lost his job, I covered 3 months of their mortgage. Susan's mouth opened slightly. I continued. I established education accounts for Noah and Lily. I helped with a furnace replacement, medical expenses, other emergencies. Mom, stop. No. The word came easily. You spent years letting people believe you built everything without help. I never said that. You stood at this table on Christmas and said Robert and Susan made everything possible. That was a toast. It was a lie. The room went silent. Michael's face reddened. You're humiliating me over gifts you chose to give. I am not asking you to repay $1. Then why bring records because you rewrote the history attached to them? Emily finally spoke. She's right. Michael turned toward her. Emily, you told me your mother had offered to help with the debt. Robert looked sharply at Michael. What debt? There it was. Michael stared at his wife. You told them? No, Emily said. You're going to. Susan leaned forward. Michael, what debt? He stood. This is getting ridiculous. Robert's voice hardened. Sit down. Michael looked at him. I saw something painful cross my son's face. Robert was a man whose approval he had chased for years. And now that man was looking at him with suspicion. Michael sat. The distribution business had problems. How serious? Robert asked. Michael didn't answer. Emily did. Serious enough that we could lose the house. Susan gasped. Robert's expression went flat. And you didn't tell us I had it handled, Michael said. No, Emily replied. You had Scarlett's house in your plan. Michael looked at me. Mom, that's not fair. I reached into my folder and removed the papers from the red folder. These are what you asked me to sign. Robert held out his hand. I gave them to him. Michael stood again. You had no right to bring private documents here. They require my signature. That makes them my documents too. Robert scanned the first pages. What were you trying to do? Michael paced toward the fireplace. I needed flexibility. I almost laughed. That word again. Flexibility with whose property? I asked. Michael turned. I wasn't taking anything. Then why did you request a valuation of my house? His face changed. Emily stared at him. You did what Robert lowered the papers. Michael said nothing. I continued. December 16th. A preliminary lending inquiry involving my address. I was gathering information about property you don't own. It's public information. Then why didn't you tell me? Michael looked trapped. I didn't enjoy it. That surprised me too. I had imagined this moment several times, but watching my son cornered by his own lies didn't feel victorious. It felt sad. Michael, I said quietly, tell them the truth. He looked at me. What truth do you want? The same truth for everyone. He said nothing. I leaned forward. You told me those papers were about protecting my house. Emily added. You told me Scarlett had already offered the house. Robert's eyes narrowed. And you told us your business was doing fine. Michael stared at the floor. 3 stories, 1 room, nowhere left to hide. Finally, he said, the company failed. Susan covered her mouth. Michael continued. I put money in trying to save it. More than I should have. How much? Robert asked. It doesn't matter. It matters if you're using your mother's property. I wasn't using it. You were planning to, Emily said. Michael turned on her. I was trying to save our home. By risking hers, I had a plan. So did you when you invested in the company. That silenced him. I watched Emily's face. There was anger there, but underneath it was heartbreak. I understood that look. It was the expression of someone realizing the person they trusted had been managing their perception instead of telling them the truth. Michael pointed toward my folder. And what is this supposed to prove? That Mom helped us fine? She helped us. Robert looked at him. You told me you made that down payment yourself. Michael's face went pale. I said we handled it. You let me believe you did. It was 15 years ago. That isn't the point. Michael stood again. Then what is the point? I answered. The point is that you needed everyone to believe you never needed help. He looked at me. And now you need more help than ever. His eyes hardened. I was going to fix this. With my house. No, with authority over my house. That's not the same thing. It is close enough that my lawyer told me not to sign. That landed. Michael froze. Lawyer? Yes. You took those documents to Charles. I did. Anger flashed across his face. You went behind my back. The hypocrisy was almost breathtaking. I stared at him. You requested a valuation on my property without telling me. You prepared legal documents before Christmas. You told your wife I had already agreed. And you're accusing me of going behind your back. He had no answer. Robert placed the documents on the table. What happens now? I looked at Michael. That depends on whether my son is finally ready to tell the whole truth. Michael's face tightened. For a moment I thought he might apologize. Instead he said, You're all acting like I tried to rob her. No, I said. Then stop treating me like a criminal. I'm treating you like a 43-year-old man who needs to explain why he thought his mother's home belonged inside his financial rescue plan. Michael looked around the room. At Emily. At Robert. At Susan. Then at me. His pride was collapsing in front of the people whose respect mattered most to him. And I could see anger replacing shame. That frightened me. Because shame sometimes tells the truth, Anger looks for someone else to blame. Michael's voice dropped. You want the truth? Yes. He looked directly at me. Fine. And something in his expression told me the next words out of my son's mouth were going to hurt far more than anything written inside that red folder. You were going to give it to me anyway. Michael stood in the middle of his living room with every pair of eyes fixed on him. You want the truth, he repeated. Yes, I said. His jaw tightened. The company didn't just fail. Emily folded her arms across her chest. We know that. No, you know part of it. Michael looked toward Robert, then away. When Jason and I started the distribution company, we had commitments from 2 hospital groups. We expected those contracts to cover most of our expansion. What happened? Robert asked. One backed out, the other delayed. Michael swallowed. We had already leased warehouse space. We had inventory coming in, employees, equipment, everything. So you borrowed more, Robert said. Michael nodded. At first, Emily repeated. I thought the contracts would come through. How much did you personally guarantee? Michael didn't answer. Emily stepped closer. How much enough? That isn't a number. I said enough. I watched my son's face. He looked exhausted. For the first time, I could see how long he had been carrying this secret. That didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained the desperation I had noticed in my kitchen. Michael rubbed both hands over his face. I put more money into the company, then I used our home equity line. Emily closed her eyes. How much? Most of what was available. Susan whispered, Oh, Michael, I was trying to protect the business. Robert shook his head. No, you were trying to avoid admitting the business had failed. Michael glared at him. You think I don't know that now? Then why are you still behaving like the answer is another loan? Because there's a restructuring option. Michael turned toward me. If I can provide additional collateral, I can consolidate the worst obligations, buy time, and avoid having everything collapse at once. There it was. Finally. No careful language. No protecting the house. No simplifying things. Collateral. My house, I said. He didn't answer. My house was the additional collateral. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. That wasn't my question. Michael exhaled. Yes. Emily looked at him as though hearing the admission aloud made it worse. You told me she offered. I thought she would. You told me she had. I knew Mom would help if she understood what was at stake. I stared at him. You never gave me the opportunity to understand, because I knew how you'd react, how like this. He gestured around the room. Lawyers, bank statements, a family tribunal. Robert's voice sharpened. Don't blame your mother for discovering what you hid. I'm not blaming her. You just did. Michael turned away. I watched him pace toward the dining room. Only days earlier he had stood there with a wine glass and praised Robert and Susan for everything. Now the same room held the truth he had been trying to keep separated. I spoke quietly. Why didn't you ask me? Michael stopped. If you had come to my house and said, Mom, I made a terrible mistake. I'm in debt. I'm scared. Can we talk about what options I have? Why didn't you do that? His back remained toward me. Because you would have said no. Maybe. He turned. Exactly. That still makes it my decision. I wasn't taking your decision away. What do you call putting documents in front of me and telling me they were for my protection? I was trying not to scare you. No. You were trying to get my signature before I understood the risk. That's not true. Then why didn't you mention your debt? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I continued. Why didn't you tell me about the property valuation silence? Why did you tell Emily I had already agreed? Still nothing. Why did you tell Noah's grandparents everything was fine? Michael's eyes flashed. What does Noah have to do with this? Nothing, I said quickly. And I meant it. Noah had already carried too much. Michael turned toward Emily. Did you involve the kids? No. Then why did Mom mention? Because your children live in this house, Emily said. They're part of the family you keep claiming you're protecting. Michael laughed bitterly. You're all very comfortable judging me now. Susan stood. No one wants to judge you. Really? He looked around. Because that's exactly what this feels like. Robert shook his head. You're 43 years old, Michael. Taking responsibility isn't persecution. That struck him. Michael's face hardened. I was trying to save my family. Emily stared at him. By lying to your family. I was trying to keep you and the kids in this house. At the risk of putting your mother out of hers, that was never going to happen. How do you know? Because I had a plan. His voice filled the room. Nobody spoke. Michael breathed heavily. Then he pointed toward the documents on the coffee table. That arrangement would have bought me time. I could have restructured the debt. The business obligations would have been handled. Mom would have stayed exactly where she is. I asked the simplest question. And if your plan failed, it wouldn't. That isn't an answer. I would have figured something out. Like you figured out the company? His face changed. I regretted the cruelty of the sentence immediately, but I didn't take it back. Michael looked wounded, then angry. You have no idea what I've been dealing with. You're right. I stood. Because you didn't tell me. I didn't want you worrying. Stop calling deception protection. He stared at me. I could feel years between us. The boy with scraped knees. The teenager who borrowed my car. The young father holding Noah for the first time. The man now standing in front of me defending his right to gamble with something I had spent decades earning. I gave you $45,000, I said. I helped when you lost your job. I helped your children, and I never asked for any of it back. Michael's voice dropped. I know. Do you? Yes. Then why wasn't asking me enough? His expression shifted. Something ugly rose out of the fear and shame. Because I knew you'd get emotional about the house. I almost couldn't believe him. Emotional, you act like it's sacred. It is my home, I know that. No, I don't think you do. It's an asset, Mom. The words cut through me. An asset. 40 years of my life reduced to one word. Michael kept going. You're sitting on all that equity while I'm trying to keep my family from being destroyed. Emily whispered Michael stop. But he didn't. I'm your only son. I stared at him. What does that have to do with anything? His frustration finally broke loose. Because you were going to give it to me anyway. The room went silent. I heard Susan inhale sharply. Michael realized what he had said. But it was too late. I looked at him. What? He lowered his voice. Eventually. I felt something inside me become very still. You mean when I die? Mom, don't say it like that. How should I say it? I'm talking about inheritance. No, you're talking about my house as though you already own it. I didn't mean you said I was going to give it to you anyway. Michael ran a hand through his hair. I'm saying what difference does it make if the value helps the family now instead of 20 years from now? And there it was. The truth beneath every document, every valuation, every question about my mortgage. Michael had stopped seeing my home as mine. He saw it as his future property, waiting for the inconvenience of my life to end. I looked toward the staircase. A shadow moved near the top. Noah. He had heard. Our eyes met. The pain on my grandson's face nearly brought me to tears. I turned back to Michael. The difference, I said, is that I'm still alive. Nobody moved. Michael's face drained of color. Mom. I'm still living in that house. I'm still paying its taxes. I'm still making decisions about my own life. I know. No, Michael. Tonight I finally understand that you don't. I picked up my blue folder. Emily stepped toward me. Scarlett, I'm going home. Michael followed me to the entryway. Mom, please. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I put on my coat. No. What? It came out honest. His eyes filled with panic. I don't want your house. You wanted control of it. To fix this. For yourself. For my family. I am your family. That stopped him. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. Then I opened the door. Michael reached toward me, but didn't touch me. What happens now? I looked back at the man I had spent 43 years loving. I don't know. And for once I truly didn't. I only know I'm not signing anything. His shoulders dropped. Then I'm finished. The old instinct rose immediately. My son was drowning. Help him. Save him. Do something. I pushed it down. No, I said quietly. You're going to face what happened. I stepped outside. Behind me, Michael said my name. I kept walking. Halfway to my car, I heard the front door open again. I turned. Noah stood on the porch. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. But I saw it in his face. He had heard his father say that my house would belong to him someday anyway. And in that moment, I understood something Michael still didn't. The greatest thing he was losing wasn't money. It wasn't the business. It might not even be his house. It was the way his own son looked at him. I drove home alone. And before I went to bed that night, I called Charles and left one message. I've made my decision. I want to change the plan. I changed the plan. Charles called me at 8:15 the next morning. I got your message. I figured you would. You sound different. I stood at my kitchen window looking at the thin layer of frost covering the backyard. I am. There was a brief silence. Do you want to tell me what happened? Michael finally told the truth. All of it enough. I closed my eyes. He said I was going to give him the house someday anyway, so he didn't understand what difference it made if he used it now. Charles said nothing. He didn't need to. I want to change everything I said. Scarlett, before we do that, I want you to wait until you're certain you're not acting out of anger. I am angry, I know. But that isn't why I'm changing it. Then why I looked around the kitchen. Because I finally understand what needs protecting. Charles gave me an appointment for that afternoon. Before I left home, I walked through every room. Not because I thought I was going to lose the house. Because for the first time since Christmas, I knew I wasn't. That realization changed how everything looked. The scratch beside the pantry door where Michael had crashed a toy truck when he was 7. The faded spot on the hardwood where David's recliner had sat for 20 years. The kitchen cabinets we had saved 3 summers to replace. The upstairs bedroom Noah used whenever he stayed overnight. None of it belonged to Michael's creditors. None of it belonged to some lender. And none of it belonged to Michael simply because he might inherit it one day. It belonged to me. That afternoon, I sat across from Charles with a yellow legal pad between us. I want to be very clear, I said. I'm not disinheriting my son. Charles nodded. I didn't assume you were. I'm angry with him, but I'm not trying to punish him from the grave. Good. I also don't want anything I leave behind disappearing into his debts that we can address. Charles began explaining options. This time I listened differently. Before Christmas, words like trust beneficiary and asset protection had felt like things responsible older people discussed because death was somewhere on the horizon. Now they felt like boundaries. We talked for nearly 2 hours. By the end of that meeting, the shape of my new estate plan was clear. My house would be placed into a trust designed first and foremost to protect my right to live there for the rest of my life. No one, not Michael, not Emily, not a lender would be able to treat it as available collateral because they expected to inherit it later. I would retain control. That mattered more to me than anything. What happens after I die, I asked. Charles turned a page. We can structure distributions rather than transferring everything outright. I want Noah and Lily protected. We can establish an education trust. I thought about the accounts I had already created for them. I want them to have opportunities, college, training, whatever makes sense for their lives. We can make the language flexible enough for qualified educational purposes. And the rest, Charles looked at me carefully. That depends on what you want for Michael. I thought about my son. Not the man who had shouted at me the night before. The whole person. The little boy. The young father. The frightened businessman. The man who had lied to me. All of him. I don't want his creditors taking whatever I leave him. Then we structure his interest with protections. So he still receives something, yes, but not in a way that allows the inheritance to be casually pledged or immediately swallowed by existing financial problems. I nodded. That's what I want. Charles studied me. You're sure? Yes. Some parents in your position would cut him out completely. I know. You're choosing not to. I'm choosing not to make permanent decisions based only on the worst thing my son has ever done. Charles leaned back. That's a useful distinction, but I'm also not going to pretend the worst thing didn't happen. That's another useful distinction. For the first time that day, I smiled. We also revoked Michael's previous financial authority. That part hurt more than changing the inheritance. Years earlier, when I named him as an alternate agent, I had felt secure. My son would take care of me if I ever needed him. Now I signed a document taking that authority away. My pen paused above the signature line. Charles noticed. "You can take more time." "No." I signed. Scarlett Gonzalez. The same name Michael had expected to see beneath the yellow tabs in his red folder. Only now my signature was doing the opposite. It wasn't giving away control, it was taking it back. Charles arranged notices to the appropriate institutions. I changed account access, updated passwords, reviewed beneficiaries, requested replacement copies of important property records. Every step felt small. Together they created something I hadn't realized I had lost. Peace. When we finished, Charles closed the folder. "There's one more question. What financial support?" I knew exactly what he meant. Michael had spent much of his adult life knowing that if something went badly enough, I would help. Not always, but often enough. "I'm done giving him money." Charles nodded. Temporarily, I thought about it. Until he proves he can face his own consequences. That answer felt right. Not never, not forever, but not now. On the drive home, my phone rang through the car speakers. Michael. I let it ring. A few minutes later, a voicemail appeared. I listened after I parked. "Mom, I'm sorry about last night. I shouldn't have said what I said. I'm under a lot of pressure. Please call me. We still have options if we move quickly." "We." I listened twice. Even in his apology, he was still thinking about the deadline, still hoping there might be another solution involving me. I deleted the voicemail. Then I immediately felt guilty. That guilt was familiar. Mothers know it well. The voice that says perhaps one more sacrifice will fix everything. Perhaps one more check, one more loan, one more rescue. I sat in the driveway with both hands on the steering wheel. David's voice came back to me. Not literally, but I knew what he would have said. Let him stand up. Michael had fallen before. Every time I had reached down. Maybe I had done it so often that he never learned the difference between being loved and being rescued. I went inside. That evening I made soup. I watched an old movie. I didn't analyze bank statements. I didn't reread legal documents. At 10:30 I went upstairs and slept for 7 uninterrupted hours. It was the best sleep I had gotten since Christmas. The next morning sunlight came through the curtains. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then I remembered. Michael. The debt. The meeting. The trust. But the panic didn't return. Something had changed. I knew my house was protected. More importantly, I knew I was protected from the pressure to save Michael at any cost. Around noon, Emily called. "Did you change the documents?" "Yes." She was quiet. "Michael thinks you're cutting him out of your will. I'm not. He said Michael has spent enough time telling people what I supposedly said." Emily went silent. I softened my voice. "He isn't being disinherited, but he will never be able to use my house as collateral. I understand. And I'm not paying his debts." Another pause. "I understand that too. Does he know?" Her honesty made me smile sadly, but I think he's starting to. After we hung up, I walked into the living room. David's photograph sat on the mantel. I picked it up. "I didn't abandon him," I whispered. That mattered to me. I had not chosen revenge. I had not decided Michael deserved ruin. I had simply stopped volunteering to stand between him and the consequences of his choices. There is a difference. A mother can love her child and still lock the door to the room where she keeps her future. She can forgive without handing back the key. She can hope he changes without financing the delay. I put David's photograph back. Then I noticed something outside the window. The maple tree Noah had planted with his grandfather years earlier was bare against the winter sky. It looked almost dead. But I knew better. Its roots were alive. Spring would come. For the first time I allowed myself to think the same might be true of my family. Michael and I were damaged. Trust had been broken. But broken was not necessarily finished. Still, if anything was going to grow again, my son would have to do something I had prevented him from doing far too many times. He would have to survive the consequences of his own mistakes. Without my checkbook, without my house, and without me rushing in to make the landing softer. The cost of the truth. For the first few weeks after I changed my estate plan, Michael barely spoke to me. At first that hurt. Then I realized silence was one consequence I could survive. What mattered was that for the first time in years, Michael had no mother-shaped emergency exit waiting behind him. And reality arrived quickly. Emily called me in late January. They sold the SUV. I looked out my kitchen window. Michael had loved that vehicle. He had bought it 2 years earlier, brand new, with more features than any reasonable person needed. What are they driving, my old Honda and a used sedan Michael bought? I almost said good. I didn't. This wasn't supposed to feel like punishment. It was simply the first visible sign that Michael had stopped trying to finance the appearance of a life he could no longer afford. The country club membership disappeared next. Then the expensive dinners. Then the weekend trips. By March, Michael and Emily put their house on the market. When I saw the listing online, I stared at the photographs longer than I should have. There was the dining room, the same table, the same chandelier. I could almost see Michael standing beneath it with his wine glass raised. Everything Emily and I have built we couldn't have done without you. That house had once represented his success. Now selling it was part of admitting what success had really cost. They moved into a smaller home 20 minutes away. No dramatic foreclosure, no sheriff at the door, no children thrown into the street, just downsizing, something Michael could have considered months earlier if his pride hadn't told him that losing status was worse than risking his mother's security. Emily increased her design work. Michael began negotiating directly with creditors and restructuring the debts he could. Robert helped him find a financial advisor. But Robert refused to write a check. I learned that during one of Susan's calls. Robert told him he'll help him build a plan, she said, but he won't buy him out of the consequences. I smiled sadly. Sounds familiar? Susan was quiet. Scarlett, I owe you an apology. For what? For Christmas. You didn't know. No. But I liked being thanked. I appreciated her honesty. We all like being appreciated. I should have wondered where you were in Michael's story. I might assure you didn't have to wonder. That was the truth. Robert and Susan did help Noah and Lily. They paid for some school expenses while Michael and Emily stabilized their finances. I had no objection to that. Helping children was different from protecting a grown man from the results of his decisions. The person I worried about most was Noah. He still visited me regularly, but something in him had changed. He rarely mentioned his father. One Saturday in April, we were planting flowers along my porch when I finally asked, "You and your dad okay?" Noah pushed soil around a plant. Yeah. Teenagers can fit an entire argument inside one syllable. That didn't sound like yes. He shrugged. He's just different. How I don't know. I waited. Eventually, he said, "He keeps acting like everything's normal. Maybe he wants it to become normal. That doesn't make it normal." No, it didn't. Noah sat back on his heels. Sometimes I think about what he said. I knew exactly which words he meant. You were going to give it to me anyway. Noah. He talked like you were already dead. The sentence hurt. I don't think that's what he meant, but it's what it sounded like. I sat beside him on the porch step. Your father was scared and ashamed. He said something terrible because he was trying to defend something he couldn't defend. That doesn't make it okay. No. I looked at him. But people should be judged by what they do after their worst moment too. Noah didn't answer. I wasn't asking him to forgive Michael. I only wanted him to leave room for the possibility. Several weeks later, Michael learned about the note. I never told him. Noah did. I found out when Michael called me one evening. His voice sounded strange. Mom. Yes, it was Noah. My stomach tightened. What happened? The note. I closed my eyes. He told you. He asked me why Grandma needed a 15-year-old to warn her about her own son. I said nothing. Michael's breathing became uneven. He heard us before Christmas. Yes, you knew from Christmas night. That's why you didn't sign. That's why I started asking questions. There was a long silence. Then Michael asked, "Why didn't you tell me? Because I promised not to put him in the middle. He was already in the middle." "I know." His voice cracked. "I thought he had to protect you from me." That was the first time I heard real shame in my son's voice. Not embarrassment. Not anger at being exposed. Shame. "Yes," I said. Another long silence. "I did that. I didn't rescue him from the sentence. He needed to hear himself say it. My own son thought his grandmother wasn't safe trusting me." "Michael, no. Don't." His voice broke. "Please don't make this easier." So I didn't. That was one of the hardest things I had ever done as his mother. A few months passed. Summer came, then fall. Michael's calls became more regular. At first they were awkward. He asked about my garden, my doctor appointments, whether I needed groceries. He never mentioned money, never mentioned the house, never asked about the trust. One rainy afternoon in October, my doorbell rang. Michael stood outside. No folder, no briefcase, nothing in his hands. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked into the kitchen and looked at the table where he had once placed the red folder. I wondered if he remembered. He did. "I hate this table," he said. I almost laughed. "I'm keeping it." That produced the smallest smile. Then it disappeared. Michael sat. I waited. "I'm sorry." He didn't add an excuse. That mattered. "I lied to Emily." I nodded. "I lied to you." "Yes." "I let Robert and Susan believe things about me that weren't true." "Yes." "And I treated your house like something that belonged to the family instead of something that belonged to you." My throat tightened. "Yes." Michael looked down. "I kept telling myself I was saving everyone. Were you no?" He shook his head. "I was saving myself from being embarrassed." That was the most truthful thing I had heard him say. I couldn't stand the idea of Robert knowing I failed, or Emily knowing how bad it was, or you knowing I needed help again. "So you tried to take away my ability to say no." He winced. "Yes." The word was barely audible. Then he looked at me. "I don't expect you to trust me." "That's good." He nodded. "I want to earn it back." I studied his face. Part of me wanted to cross the kitchen and hold him. Another part remembered yellow signature tabs. Both feelings were real. "I love you," I said. His eyes filled. "I love you too. But love isn't the same as trust." "I know. And forgiveness isn't permission to pretend nothing happened." "I know. I'm not changing the trust back. I'm not asking you to." That mattered too. For several seconds we sat quietly. Then Michael asked, "Can we start somewhere?" I thought about it. "Yes." His face changed. Not relief exactly. Hope. But slowly. "I can do slowly." I smiled. "You've never been good at slowly." "I'm learning." When he left, I stood at the window and watched him walk to a used gray sedan. No expensive SUV. No polished image. Just my son. Smaller somehow. But perhaps more real. And I finally understood what had broken through to him. It wasn't losing the business. It wasn't selling the car. It wasn't downsizing the house. It wasn't even my refusal to give him money. It was Noah. Michael could explain away creditors. He could blame markets, contracts, partners, and bad timing. But he couldn't explain away the fact that his 15-year-old son had looked at him and seen someone his grandmother needed protection from. That was the debt no refinancing plan could erase. Michael would have to repay it differently, with honesty, with patience, with years of better choices. And for the first time since Christmas, I believed he might actually try. The next Christmas, 1 year later, Christmas came back to my house. Not Michael's, mine. The decision had happened naturally. Emily called me in November and asked, "Would you mind hosting this year?" For 1 second I remembered the previous Christmas. The chandelier. The toast. Noah's note. Then I looked around my kitchen. I'd like that. So on Christmas morning, I woke before sunrise and made coffee in the same kitchen where Michael had once placed that red folder in front of me. By noon the house smelled like turkey cinnamon butter and the sweet potatoes Susan insisted on bringing. There was nothing impressive about my dining room. The table had belonged to David's mother. 2 chairs didn't match. My Christmas dishes were almost 20 years old. But when everyone arrived, the house felt full. Robert carried wine. Susan brought enough food for twice the number of people coming. Emily arrived with Lily, who ran straight toward me. Noah came in behind them. I was 16 now, and somehow seemed to have grown another 3 inches. Grandma. He wrapped both arms around me. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Then Michael stepped through the door. He held a pie. Nothing else. No expensive bottle. No extravagant gift. Just pie. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas. We hugged. A year earlier, I would have known immediately whether the hug meant everything was forgiven. Now I understood relationships weren't that simple. Some wounds don't disappear. They become places where you learn to be more careful with each other. Michael had spent the year doing exactly what he promised. Slowly. He called regularly. Not because he needed money. Sometimes just to ask whether I had watched a television show he liked. He came over in spring to repair the loose railing on my porch. In summer, he helped me move furniture without asking a single question about property values. In October, when my washing machine died, he recommended a repairman. He did not offer to manage the purchase for me. That small detail meant more than he probably understood. He and Emily were still repairing their marriage too. Their smaller house was comfortable. Emily's design business had grown because she took on more work. Michael remained in medical sales and had abandoned the idea of owning another business anytime soon. The debts weren't gone, but they were shrinking. That mattered. Reality had become less glamorous. It had also become more honest. Dinner was noisy. Lily complained that Noah had taken the crispiest piece of turkey skin. Susan told Robert to stop putting gravy on everything. Emily laughed more than I remembered her laughing the year before. And Michael washed dishes without being asked. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them. For a moment I imagined David beside me. He would have loved this. Not the conflict that brought us here, but this version of us. Imperfect, quieter, still together. When dessert was finished, Michael tapped his spoon gently against his glass. My body reacted before my mind did. I froze. A year disappeared. Suddenly, I was back beneath that chandelier, watching my son stand to praise everyone except me. Noah noticed. His eyes met mine. Michael stood. I promise this won't be long. Robert smiled. That's what people always say before long speeches. Everyone laughed. Michael didn't. He looked at me. I said something at Christmas last year that I've thought about almost every day since. The table became quiet. I thanked people for everything they had done for my family. He glanced at Robert and Susan. And I meant that gratitude. You've both done a lot for us. Robert nodded. But I used that gratitude to hide something. Michael's eyes returned to me. I wanted everyone to believe I had built my life without needing much help. My throat tightened. I was ashamed that I had failed financially. And because I was ashamed, I started rewriting my own history. Emily reached for his hand. Michael continued. My mother helped me when I bought my first house. She helped when I lost my job. She helped my children. She helped me more times than I deserved. I looked down. I didn't need this acknowledgement anymore. Maybe that was why I could finally receive it without anger. But that wasn't my worst mistake, Michael said. My worst mistake was confusing help with entitlement. Noah stopped eating. Michael looked toward him. When someone helps you often enough, it becomes dangerously easy to stop seeing generosity as a gift. His voice became unsteady. I started seeing Mom's house as something that would eventually be mine. Nobody moved. And I nearly destroyed my relationship with her because I treated her future like it belonged to me. He swallowed. I was wrong. My eyes filled. Michael looked directly at me. And Mom, thank you for not saving me. A small laugh escaped me through my tears. That's an unusual Christmas thank you. A few people laughed softly. Michael smiled. I mean it. He sat down. If you had paid my debts, I probably would have told myself my plan almost worked. That sentence stayed with me. Because he was right. Sometimes rescuing someone does not end the lesson, it interrupts it. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room. Lily sat on the floor surrounded by wrapping paper. Robert fell asleep in David's old recliner. Susan pretended not to notice. Emily and Michael stood near the tree talking quietly. I was carrying coffee toward the sofa when Noah appeared beside me. Grandma. Yes. He held out a folded piece of paper. My heart stopped. For one terrible second I was back in that bathroom. Grandma, don't sign anything Dad gives you. I looked at Noah. He smiled. What is this? Just read it. I set down my coffee. Then I unfolded the note. 6 words were written in his familiar handwriting. Grandma, this Christmas feels like Christmas again. I read it twice, then a third time. When I looked up, my eyes were wet. You scared me. I know. You did that deliberately. His grin widened. Maybe. I slapped his arm gently. Terrible child. He hugged me. I held him tighter than necessary. Over his shoulder I saw Michael watching us. He noticed the paper in my hand. For a moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then Noah walked over and showed it to him. Michael read it, his eyes closed. When he opened them again, he looked at me. No words were necessary. The first note had warned me that something in my family was breaking. The second told me something had begun to heal. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the living room. Wrapping paper filled a trash bag. Dirty glasses waited in the kitchen. The tree lights reflected in the window. I opened the drawer where I had kept Noah's first note for the entire year. Then I placed the second note beside it. I didn't throw the first one away. Healing did not require pretending the wound never happened. Both notes belonged to our story. One represented the moment I realized love without boundaries could become dangerous. The other represented what happened when those boundaries were finally respected. I looked around my house. My house. Those 2 words no longer felt defensive. They felt peaceful. Michael might inherit something from me one day. Noah and Lily would too. But inheritance was about what remained after a life had been lived. It was not permission to claim that life early. I switched off the Christmas tree. Before going upstairs, I paused beside David's photograph. You would have been proud of him tonight, I whispered. Then I thought about it. And maybe proud of me too. I smiled. For years I believed being a good mother meant standing between my son and every hard landing. I had been wrong. Sometimes love catches someone. Sometimes love comforts them after they fall. And sometimes love steps aside and lets them discover that they are strong enough to stand back up on their own. I had not saved my family by signing away my house. I had not saved it by humiliating Michael or cutting him out of my life. I had saved what could still be saved by telling the truth, protecting what was mine, and finally saying the word I had been afraid would make me a bad mother. No. That one word had nearly broken us. But in the end, it gave us the chance to rebuild honestly. And as I climbed the stairs that